What is going on out there to all of my Christ follower friends and anyone spiritually curious? This might be an interesting one for you. This message hit me yesterday evening like a bolt of lightning, and it's been a long time since that happened, and I felt absolutely compelled to preach it to you tonight. So let's go. I'm calling it Jesus mic drop moment because checkmate out the gate wasn't, I think, clear enough for a title for this one. And we're talking about paying taxes to Caesar, this part in Matthew. We're looking at chapter 21 and 22. I just want to kind of talk about something that maybe has been discussed a lot, but I think maybe some of the intimate elements may have been overlooked. And for me, my initial interest in studying Jesus was based around how good of a marketer he was. I'm a marketing guy. Here's the most well-known name individual in the history of humanity. Maybe I should study this guy and see what does he know? Well, I can tell you this. Telling people to pay their taxes is not a good marketing message. Maybe there's some people who are cool with paying taxes. Maybe there's some people who don't mind paying taxes. But it's not a great marketing message. And particularly in this time or anywhere in this realm of the world where the Roman Empire had their teeth completely into you, tax collectors were basically the devil. Paying taxes was terrible. It's not like today where they say, oh, we'll take a piece of however much you make. No, they just took everything. They wanted to tax you into oblivion. They wanted all of your wealth. So taxes here, just keep that in mind as we look at this context here. And Jesus is telling people to pay their taxes. A terrible message from a marketing perspective. So not exactly a popular message anyway. Why was it so effective then? Why was it so effective? Why do we still talk about it today? Why is there so much to learn from it? It's that good. And that's what we're going to go into here. I'm going to pull up the scripture here just so you can see it as well. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Well, first of all, we need to set this up. How did we get here? I think it's always good to understand the context of the story. And this is in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, which is Matthew was one of the 12. He was right there. He witnessed this. This is a firsthand account of something that took place. One of the reasons why I really enjoy reading Matthew and John a lot because of those reasons. And Luke and Acts for other reasons, but nothing wrong with Mark. It's just so brief. You get first, and it's not a first-hand account necessarily because Mark wasn't one of the 12. So here from Matthew, we get some details about this, and I just think it's so interesting. So let's jump over. We're going to start where the story sort of begins. The authority of Jesus is challenged, and this is in Matthew 21:23. And when he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came up to him as he was teaching and said, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? So they challenge him. Now imagine this, first of all, what's Jesus doing here? He's walked into someone else's temple and is preaching. That's pretty bold, okay? I think the chief priests and the elders were actually pretty kind with him here and said, hey, who gave you permission to do this? I mean, can you imagine if someone like myself or someone that wasn't known to a church went into a church and just started preaching to the congregation? That wouldn't be looked good upon probably in any era. Nonetheless, Jesus answered them, and he didn't answer them directly. He goes to essentially outwit them. Here's what he says. I also will ask you one question, and if you tell me the answer, then I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, he's talking about John the Baptist and all the people who were baptized by John. From where did it come? From heaven or from man? Meaning, is it of the men? Is it just an idea in men's heads? Is John an imposter? Is John a phony? Or did it come from heaven? Now, mind you, he's talking to the chief priests and the elders. So these guys are a big deal. Chief priests and elders. If you know anything about, religion or the hierarchy of back in the day, chief priests, elders, these are people who are at the top of that chain, okay? So they discussed amongst themselves, and they were saying these things. And my guess is that Matthew overheard this, or he knew, or he was there next to someone who did. He told him right away because he was a witness to this. If we say from heaven, he will say to us, why did you not believe him then? But if we say from man, We are afraid of the crowd, for they all hold that John was a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." So a couple things that's going on here. First of all, is Jesus just trying to prove that is he being ornery? Is he saying, "Hey, you guys think you're so smart, watch, I'm going to outwit you"? Is that what's going on? I don't think so. I think Jesus is preaching to these men. I think he is doing the same thing that he did to me, the same thing that I know he's done to you, which is he's always coming for you. I was annoyed by it for the first 36 years of my life. I was annoyed by it, how often it came up, how many times people tried to talk to me about Jesus or church situation or any. For such a long time, I was annoyed by it. And I realized he was just coming. He just kept coming for me. He was after me. And I think he is trying to preach to these guys, and he's trying to get through to them in a way that makes sense to them. They are the chief priests, the elders. These are educated people. They're in high status, of class for the time. And they respect the academic elements. They respect the intelligence, the intellect, the wit. So he outwits them. But not only does he outwit them here, look what he does. He asks them about a heavenly matter. He asks them if the baptism that John was doing was from heaven or from man. This was a very big deal at the time. And he got them to admit, we don't know. Publicly. He got them to admit that they didn't know really what was from heaven or what was from man. So that's huge. Now, let's fast forward. So he goes here and begins preaching about the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so this takes place, this altercation takes place, and he starts dropping parables. The parables of the two sons, parables of the tenants. The next one was, I believe, the wedding. And then they try to basically do the same thing to him a little bit later here. Make sure you can see this. They tried to do the same thing to him a little bit later. This is Matthew 22:15. So then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. So this is some time later, and the chief priests and the elders must have gone to the Pharisees, and these were the holy men of the Sanhedrin, and said, hey, this guy is doing some stuff. He outwitted us. He made us look terrible. We need to go make him look bad. We need to figure out how to get him back for this. Well, here's what's interesting. The Pharisees plotted how to entangle him, but they sent their disciples to him. So they didn't have the confidence to go themselves. They sent their disciples in, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Is it lawful, is what they said. Is it lawful? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" How does hypocrite make sense right here? If he said hypocrite here in this particular situation, he wasn't talking about what they had just said to him. What he was talking to them about was the fact that they were questioning him. Even though they were teachers of faith, they were there questioning the Messiah himself and having no faith themselves. And I think that's why he said hypocrites here. He says, "Show me the coin for the tax." They brought him a denarius. By the way, someone found one of these, a denarius, not that long ago. And I think it sold for $150,000, an actual denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. The key word here is marveled. We're going to get to that in a second, because this is, I believe, a truly divine communication where you take something. A lot of people say things to me. I have a lot of conversations with atheists and do a lot of different individual one-on-one evangelism stuff. And a lot of people will say things like, well, the Bible's too perfect, or they'll say, well, it's too contradictory, or the story is too good, things like that. This is a story that wouldn't be a good one to put in to circulate at this particular time, that Jesus said you should pay your taxes. That alone probably did a lot of damage. It probably did a lot of damage to the overall message and what was happening in his ministry. A lot of people were probably like, what? He said pay the taxes to the Romans? He must not be the Messiah then, because they thought the Messiah was going to come in on a horse and free them from Rome with a sword. He just told everyone to pay the taxes to Caesar? It wasn't a good message. But the divine communication is what's huge here. Because he's not just saying, pay your taxes. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is this, and when I downloaded this message late last night, I'll tell you one thing that came through very clearly for me. He's not just saying pay your taxes. He's saying give away the material world to those who seek it, because it isn't worth a rock. He's basically saying, hey, the material world is not worth chasing. It's not worth fighting over. It's not worth being upset about. It's just not. So give those things. And you can use Caesar as a word that describes lots of things. Give the Caesar, translate the word material. Therefore, render to the materialists all the materials. Because the real important thing was also render to God the things that are God's. That's the thing that he's looking at. He means to give yourself to God. You are a child of God. You have to give yourself to God. That's your heart, your soul, your love, your attention, your devotion. We talked about that earlier. He's devoted to you. He's come after you. He came after me for years. I'm very, very lucky that I had an experience that can't be really described. But it was a situation in which I was shown for certain, with certainty, just for me, something that only I would understand, something that I couldn't necessarily take and go and show someone else. Oh, look, it's real, it's true. But it was a very clear communication to me. And I feel extremely lucky to have that communication. So here's the mic drop. He just told them. They tried to put him in the same situation, right? They tried to put him in a situation where he couldn't go either way. Because if he says, no, don't pay taxes to Caesar, right? They are going to go to the Romans and say, hey, this preacher is telling people not to pay taxes. And that would be a big problem for Jesus. And his ministry would be a big problem. He'd probably get arrested right away. So he couldn't say that. If he says, pay the taxes to Caesar, then that's going to ruin his whole crowd. Remember, the crowd that Jesus is preaching to, most of the time, 90% illiterate and very, very poor. These are the people who are getting crushed by the taxes. So to say to pay the taxes was a very tough statement to make. Very tough. But he made it. And what's interesting about it is he got everybody with, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled. When was the last time you marveled? You know, it's something that had happened sometimes, right? You could probably remember the last time you were just absolutely marveled, just mind blown, like, and they left him and went away. They just walked off. They had no response to that. The coin has Caesar's face on it. It must be Caesar's then. You are a child of God. You need to render to God the things that are God's, including yourself. And so that is the mic drop moment right there, where he says the one thing that's the worst thing to say. If you were going to make a story up, if this was a false story, why would you make up a story where he's telling people to pay the taxes? You wouldn't make that story up. That's not a very good story to make up. That would be a terrible story to make up. Whoever made up that story would need to be fired. They're not very good at making up stories. But when you see the true message and That's the thing that's interesting to me about Scripture, particularly the Bible, the dynamic element of it and the way that you can open it up and it can really, really speak to you. That's what's happening with this particular situation. This is one of those moments where he's going, I'm going to flip this on its head. I'm going to say the thing that no one can believe I'm going to say, but I'm going to give you a good reason. I'm going to give you a reason that makes sense to you. This is the reason for the parables, right? There was an uneducated crowd. It was tough. And this message was very, very high level from a spiritual perspective. But these people either believed that he was Messiah, which means that they believed in God, or they were hardcore, Jewish faith on the other side of the aisle who were saying, no, you're not him. Either way, at this time in this area, people are very interested in God. So to remind them that they're focusing on material too much and they're giving too much of their life to it. Listen, there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with having money. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's very useful. You can do many things with it. Same back then. The problem is back then, like today and throughout all of human history, a little bit too much emphasis has been put on gaining materials and less emphasis on finding the truth. It's just seeking the truth about God. And that is what is so powerful about this. And when they heard it, they marveled. They just were speechless because he said the one thing they thought for sure he couldn't say. And then he gave them a legitimate reason. It just blew them away. And they left him and went away. Now they continued to challenge him. Jesus had many mic drop moments, but this one was particularly incredible. And I speak to, a lot of agnostics and atheists and things like that. And, even if you are of essentially no faith of whatsoever, everyone can kind of agree to this. Materials are only here. So that means they have a very limited use, a very limited shelf life of use in the grand scheme of things. So everyone knows you don't get to take your stuff with you. That's it. In fact, I had a client this week. She was asking me, they live in Orange County. They have a paid off house. If we want to move to Carlsbad, we're going to sell our house. It's paid off. We're going to make, $900,000. Then we're going to buy a place in Carlsbad and it's going to cost more money. But she asked me, do you think we should do it? I just said, well, does it make you happy? Does it make you excited? You don't get to take any of this stuff with you. You guys have worked hard your whole lives. What do you want to do? You think you can't do what you want to do? Because why? There's a little too much survival instinct that's attached to money and materials. And we see it all the time in our industry. People will freak out. If a transaction goes sideways or something happens, people will completely freak out as if they were going to be bankrupt, as if their whole business were going to collapse should this deal not go through. And we just give it a little too much. So with this right here, Matthew 22:21, let's say, 22:21, yeah. Give the materials to the materials seekers and make sure that we're giving God what's owed to him. It's not just saying pay your taxes. All right, guys, I'm going to head to bed. You guys have a great night and take care, and I'll see you on the flip side.